Have you ever paused to reflect on the moments that shape our faith and beliefs? I'm Danny, and in this podcast, Countryside Christian, we embark on a journey together to explore the raw and personal path to faith. We often see the finished products of faith, perhaps a manager of a church ministry or someone standing in a pulpit. But we rarely talk about the messy middle. Or we see the harvest, but we rarely talk about the tilling of the soil. We ignore the challenges, the discoveries, and the profound loneliness that often accompanies the start of a spiritual walk. This podcast is for those who are currently starting that journey or even questioning where you are. By pulling back the curtain on what it actually feels like to step into a church for the first time or wrestle with an ancient text in a modern world. At the beginning of each podcast, I will pray for what is on my mind and this podcast. In our first episode, we looked at the roots of our faith, but today we're moving from the internal to the external. We are talking about the first step, the physical act of walking into a new space when you feel like an outsider. It is the moment your hand touches the heavy wooden door of a church and you wonder, do I belong here? Before we go further, let us pray. Jesus, just as you walk with us on our journey, we accept you into our hearts so that we may take that first step towards you. Thank you for your sacrifice on the cross so that we may live with the hope and love we feel. Thank you that I can share the journey of my own steps with others today. We are sorry for the sin that has come before us. May we be able to recognize where we need your strength. And I ask that you carry us when we are at our lowest. I pray that whoever listens gains the confidence and knowledge that you are there with them on their path. Just as you have planted the seed and tilled the soil, may we grow towards your light. Amen. That prayer for growth starts with a single physical movement. When we think of a seed in the soil, it is stationary. It is being acted upon before it can break the surface. My own journey started much the same way. When I first visited St. Mary's, I would not have been stepping. I would have been wheeled or carried. I cannot truly say what it was like entering the church for the first time. The actual first step, the one where I acknowledged that I wanted to go, would not come until much later in life. I remember my childhood Sunday school in the 90s. I don't remember exactly what I learnt, but I remember the friendships and the amazement I felt looking at the colourful windows. But that amazement was often mixed with anxiety. Fast forward to my late 20s, I had to step back into the church that had both nurtured and destroyed my faith, to inquire about getting married. Throughout the service, I was filled with a strange mix of anxiety and joy. By 2020, I had moved to Boston and approached Holy Trinity Church. Originally, I only stepped back inside to have my banns read, a legal requirement for my wedding. I was still anxious, but little did I know there would be an invitation to join this wonderful community, an invitation that finally made me feel welcome. I am going to lightly touch on the feeling of do I belong here? This was a question I asked myself, not for the first time I walked in, but a few weeks later as I realised where I was and the commitment I was taking, but we'll dive into this later in the series. Taking that step back into the church in Boston required a strength I didn't think I had. I have learnt that we often worry we won't have the energy to finish the journey. But the word in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31 tells us, But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. God doesn't just give us the strength to soar, he gives us the steady endurance to walk into that church for the first time and not faint from the pressure. We often talk about the harvest, but a farmer knows that if a seedling isn't protected, there'll be no crop to gather. My own first steps in faith were taken in a Sunday school chair. But when my personal life hit a breakdown in 1999, I felt the community didn't see my warning light. To help us understand how we can better support the next generation as they take their first steps, I am joined by Eden, a youth worker in York. Eden, thank you for joining me in the workshop today. How are you?
I'm doing good, yeah. Thanks for inviting me to kind of be on here.
It's lovely to see you because, again, most of the time when we're catching up, it's mainly over the phone. So
Yeah.
Let's get into the main depths of the questions. So, as I mentioned in my own journey, I remember the Sunday school at St. Mary's and the mix of awe and anxiety. I felt like a passenger for a long time. I truly took the wheel. But what about you? Before you were a leader, you were a newcomer. Can you take us back to your own first step towards God, and what did that heavy wooden door look like for you?
So I'm a youth worker in York at the moment. I've been here for 18 months almost. And so it's part of my job to sort of be involved, I suppose, in sort of church life, I guess. But for me personally, I think I've grown up in and around the church. I'm in my mid to late 20s now, but I've grown up kind of in and around the church. I have always sort of been aware of the idea of a God, the idea of who Jesus is. But I would say that personally for me, it became more of a reality sort of in my mid-teen, kind of late teen years. Not to say that it wasn't there beforehand, but it became significant to me kind of in my later teen years. Due to a number of things that happened, but one of them being that I found a church that I went to, not by myself, but without the rest of my family. That was something that I hadn't really done before. So just before I turned 16, or when I was 16, I joined a different church, which was really good and really, I guess, what I needed. And so I feel like that's when I made the decision to be baptized in that space. So I think that was sort of the start of my personal kind of intentional journey with God.
Fantastic. One of the things I'm just going to pick up on is you mentioned at 16 you went to a different type of church. So
Yes.
Sometimes we switch between different parts of Christianity, whether that be Pentecostal, Evangelical, Baptist, whatever that may look like. What did that actually look like of a transfer of churches for you?
So my family and I had been raised almost in free churches, in non-denominational Baptist. The first church I ever went to was a Baptist church, and it kind of growing up kind of flitted between, I suppose, different denominations. Never really thought anything of the reasoning for different denominations. Never really knew what difference things made, and wasn't particularly bothered by the idea of it because it didn't really have much of an impact in my life at the time. And since then, I think it's really healthy and helpful to kind of church shop is a phrase that people have used previously. I think that's a really kind of helpful idea, especially when you're sort of new, or not new to faith necessarily, but kind of trying to find something that works. It's good to kind of see what's out there. But no, growing up, I didn't really notice much of a difference between sort of different denominations until I kind of accidentally arrived at an Anglican church.
Oh, well, as you probably know, I did grow up in an Anglican church. So for myself, it was very regimented and follow a lot of different liturgy along with different practices that are seen predominantly within the Anglican church. Some of it does transfer into others. But I think for between me and you, because of how long we've kind of known each other now,
Yeah.
we very much share the ideas between the different experiences that we've had over the years, and we're able to find common ground. And then
absolutely.
And then there's other times when we do disagree on stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really healthy, actually. Because I think if you're looking for something that's going to support your, as you've legitimately said, something that's going to support your first steps, it needs to be somewhere that can ground you and kind of give you a secure footing, but also somewhere that's going to challenge you. Not because it's something to fall back on, and something to kind of make you ask questions.
Definitely. And that's one of the main things I do enjoy about speaking to you about it as well, in previous scenarios as well as future scenarios. I'm sure we'll pick up. Now, moving on to the next question. When a new family or young person arrives at the door, perhaps carrying the same anxiety I felt in the 90s, how do you manage that initial interaction? What is your process for ensuring they don't just feel like a passenger, but like someone who is welcome to pick up the tools and join the community?
Yeah, I think, first of all, if it's a adult, whoever it is coming into church for the first time, I think it can be overwhelming and maybe a bit intimidating. And as church, we try and not be that. We try and be kind of welcoming and joyful and all the rest of it. And I think that that's valid and that's true. But also, I think some of the time we're not very good at sort of going, actually, this step for you might have been huge. Like, it might have taken months, years to get to. Like, actually, this isn't, like, coming into this space, it isn't. I think sometimes we make it more of a big deal than it is. And we make it seem sometimes a bit insurmountable. But actually, all they're doing is stepping into a group of people who are doing life together and are learning together and are growing together. And I think that to acknowledge that is really helpful, especially when someone first comes into a space. It's not necessarily like, oh my gosh, yes, you've come into this space, like, let's, give you an amazing conversion story. Like, that does happen and that has happened. And you see, scriptural evidence of it, especially on kind of the road to Damascus. But actually, like, the person who walks in that door for the first time is first and foremost a human loved and created by God. And so whether or not they decide that they're going to make that church their home or that they're going to, pursue faith or anything, they are a person and are, they deserve to be treated as such before anything else.
I think one of the things that you're really hitting on well there is about they don't have to have their faith kind of polished as they walk through the door. It isn't about knowing from the A to Z of the Bible, from day one. It's about walking in. I've come to find out about Jesus. That is the first question.
Yes. Yeah. No, 100%. And I think it would be really unfair and hypocritical of me, but also maybe of other Christians to go, oh, you got to have your faith all polished. Like the word you used, Danny, you got to have your faith all polished before you come through. Because actually, if that were the case, none of us would be coming through those doors. Because if the Christian life and if the Christian faith is a journey, which I believe it is, then there's never a point at which any of us are, are there as such. There's a passage in scripture, and I can't remember exactly where it is, but it says, it basically says, Jesus, like, I'm unworthy to untie. I think it's one of his disciples talking to him, and he's talking about how I'm unworthy to untie your shoes. And that sounds really random. I'm aware of that, but actually it's like all of us without Jesus are unworthy to approach God. It's not because we've got things sorted or because we know the entire Bible back to front or because we read it all the time or whatever. No, it's because of, Jesus' sacrifice for us on the cross. And I think if we get ahead of ourselves too much and kind of assume that people have to have it sorted before they come in, that's where danger lies.
Definitely. I tell you what, it's a very enlightening feeling to know there are people like yourself out there that are welcoming these people into the church day in, day out. And just kind of rolling in to the next part, we've talked about the heavy wooden door from the perspective of the leader and the newcomer, but often the person standing at the door isn't alone. They have a friend with them.
Yeah.
I have learned that many people are just waiting for an invitation to perform their daily checks, but they are stuck in the maintenance gap of fear. If a friend came to you, but were terrified of the first step, how would you encourage them? And what is the process for being a good wingman to someone who is nervous about walking into a church for the first time?
I think there's a lot of focus here on walking into the church.
Mm.
I think that is valid and that is helpful. And a lot of growth happens outside of the church building too. And like I alluded to kind of earlier on, walking into a building can be really overwhelming and intimidating. And so if I came across someone who was indeed saying they want to come in, but it's too much, or they want to explore, but they don't feel they're ready to take the first physical step into a church building, well, I think I would start with, well, let's just go for a drink. Let's get some food together. Let's chat about life. Maybe if they're a committed Christian already who are looking for a new church, let's go and do something we both enjoy and open the Bible together. Like that. Let's kind of explore this in a less intimidating, less overwhelming, less kind of full on sort of maybe blowing up the senses kind of idea, because actually that and then when they come again, if they come again, they've got someone they know, they've got a friendly face, because church on a Sunday morning is great, but it's not the epitome of community. What happens outside of it is, I think. And so it's I would say, like, yeah, meet up with them on a one-to-one basis, or invite them to a small group, or go and do something with them that you're getting to know them as a person.
That's awesome. The best thing is the fact that you diverted away from the fact of, sometimes that anxiety, because walking through a church can be very, very anxiety driven, and depending on the person, they may just need a different approach, which is very true in most circumstances. And I think one of the best things the church is doing is offering different ways into faith, whether that be through just one-on-one catch-ups, whether that be a small group. And this is some of the ways the church is evolving. What has been some of your experiences with small groups or one-on-one interactions?
I'm part of a small group now in York, and it's really great because it's a small group that's come out of a church that has 3 services a day. And so you're unlikely to always see everybody at the same service and the same week. But what we do well, I think, is we assume that everybody's watched or listened to or physically been at the service the previous day, because we meet on a Monday. And we talk about it in quite a lot of depth. And I find that really helpful, not just because it's helpful to kind of talk about something that happened the day before, but because we've all come in from having had largely the same experience. And we can talk about it, and we're a community of people, and I really like that. So I think that's one of my experiences of small group at the moment. I don't know if that kind of answers your question at all.
So when we talk about small groups, is there a way for, say, for example, if you had a friend that you hadn't seen for a while, and they'll just be like, Eden, I haven't talked to Jesus, I haven't been to church for a while, I just need something that's different, that doesn't feel as anxiety driven. How would you bring them into that small group?
That's a really tricky question to answer, because I think sometimes it's not, especially when your small group is established, it's not always straightforward to bring someone new in. Because there are relationships that are already there. There's a culture that already exists in that group. Whether it's obvious or not, it will be there. And so I would definitely invite them to the idea of a small group, but I would want them to find one that works for them, rather than assuming that they'll slot into what already exists.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, you'll probably invite them to your one first, and using your knowledge of the other small groups that are around your local area, you would help them find the right one for themselves.
Yeah.
That's definitely a great approach to do it, because again, you're not just saying you've got to come to mine. You're saying we're going to find what works for you. So that's cool.
What's helpful for me might not be for them necessarily.
Definitely. That is a vital reminder that we don't have to push that heavy door open by ourselves. Eden, thank you for helping us pull back the curtain on how we can support those in the messy middle. It's okay to be a work in progress as long as we keep the communication lines open with God. I hope this conversation has encouraged anyone listening who feels like a passenger to consider taking that first step towards the wheel. Before we finish today, I have a daily check for you. This week, I want you to look at your own heavy wooden door. What is the one thing stopping you from taking that first step towards a conversation with God? Identify it, name it, and remember, the Father is already holding on to the string, waiting to guide you back. In our next episode, we'll be looking at the good enough myth, the idea that we have to be perfectly maintained before we can be used by God. I'm Danny, the countryside Christian. Keep the faith, keep the momentum, and let us get to work. See you in the next one.